feedback, criticism. My tender feelings won't be hurt, I promise. So you tell me what you want to talk about. But I do have a few things to say. As you heard in the intro, our office does a number of things, right? We've got responsibilities in state law, we've got responsibilities even in the Minnesota Constitution, and there's no question, though, that the responsibility we have in our office that gets the most attention, attracts the most interest, also attracts the most scrutiny at a time like this and a year like this, is elections. So as you know, we oversee the Minnesota election system. Now, just to level set, and many of you know this, but I think it's worth repeating. Here's what we do not do. Here's what we have never done as an office, probably never will do. We don't count votes. We're not the vote counters. That happens in literally thousands of places across Minnesota, in townships, in cities, in counties, right? Done by your friends and neighbors, the election judges. How many people here have ever been an election judge, even one time? Wow, okay. Thank you and bless you. We need 30,000 people, 30,000 every election to stand up and step up and do that job. It's a lot of work. It's one day of a lot of work, but we need folks to do that. But we don't hire or train or pay the election judges. That too happens at the local level. So what do we do in our office? Well, a few things. Way before anyone votes on any ballot in any election, we do things like we certify all the elections equipment for use. You know, we vote on paper in Minnesota, good old-fashioned paper, but you feed it into a tabulating machine, as you know. So you got to make sure that that stuff is working, that it's worthy, that it's legitimate, that it's functional, and we do that. Then way over after everyone votes, we do things like post-election audits and reviews. You got to make sure the math lines up before you certify a statewide election, and even afterwards. You want to make sure everything's on the up and up. And then in the middle, we spend a lot of time at the Capitol when the legislature is in session, trying to change and tweak and perfect our election laws. We are in constant contact with our partners in counties and cities and townships on legal matters and policy advice, and then we have a robust voter outreach part of our office that does nonpartisan voter outreach. So as a result of all of that stuff, I like to say that I and we in our office are in the democracy business. And I'm sure you figured out it is quite a time to be in the democracy business these days, right? Now look, I am an optimist, I really am. At the end of the day, I am a long-term optimist about democracy in America and democracy in Minnesota. Does democracy feel a little bit dinged and dented these last few years? Absolutely, no question about it. But defeated? No way, no way. And I want to talk about a little of that today. Today is 175 days from the election. That's 25 weeks exactly from today, 175 days. Now that sounds like a long period of time, but as you know, it is not. That's gonna go really, really fast. And so we have some work to do to make sure that candidates that support democracy get across the finish line, right? And when I look out at an election, at least on my official side, when I look out at an election, especially one like this year, at 175 days, I have two main goals, okay? Two things that I want to see as Secretary of State in a big statewide election. You ready? Here they are. I'm looking to get high turnout and low drama. That's what I want. High turnout and low drama. I didn't say no drama. There's always going to be a little bit of drama, or it wouldn't be an election in Minnesota, right? But I want low drama. And so I want to talk about those two things as well. High turnout. This is Minnesota. We love to vote in Minnesota. I hope you know that, but I love to repeat it, even if people know it. We are champions of voting in Minnesota. There's no question about that. Year after year after year, going back 50 years. This isn't just about my tenure in office. This is going back literally 50 years. We are almost always first, second, or third in the country in voter turnout. In Olympics terms, we are always on the medal stand, right? We're bronze, we're silver, we're gold. And recently, the last few years, we had a streak going where for 3 elections in a row, we were number 1 in America in voter turnout. 3 in a row. You may be asking, though, who is the reigning champ right now as we speak? So in the 2024 election, the presidential, who was number 1 there? Well, it depends whose numbers you believe the most. If you believe the numbers put out by the federal government, they had us once again in Minnesota, number 1 in the nation in voter turnout. However, if you believe what I gotta say is an equally reputable, reliable set of numbers by some really good academic folks at the University of Florida, they had us at number 2, missing the number 1 spot by 0.2%. Just think about that. 0.2%. That's not the worst part. The worst part is they had us losing to Wisconsin. And I'm sorry, but I don't care whether it's sports or voting or anything else, that is just not tolerable, right? At all. The point is, we're always at the top of the list, 1, 2, or 3. And people ask me, given my job, if I have a theory about that. And they'll say, hey Steve, you say you're in the democracy business. Well, you must have a theory. Why does Minnesota do so often when it comes to voting? What is it? Is it something in the water? Luck? Coincidence? No, I don't think it's any of those things. I do have a theory. I think it's a couple of things. It boils down, in my view, to 2 things. We got good laws, and we got a good pro-voter culture in Minnesota. Let me just tell you what I mean in a nutshell. Laws. We got good laws. And yeah, that really matters. And I think in any election system, if we were to design an election system from scratch in this room, we don't have time to do that, but let's say we did, and we said, let's just junk every single law, throw it out the window, and start over here in this room. I mean everything. How old you gotta be, where you do it, how you do it. We just designed our own from the bottom up. I think what would be in the back of our minds is 2 things. Access and security. You want to get to that perfect blend of those 2 things. Now, there's no such thing as perfect, so you'll always be chasing that. But that's at least what you're going for, access and security. Access meaning, let's not make this thing an obstacle course, right? Let's make this thing, easy to do, easy to understand, approachable, all the rest, right? We all want that. Security, of course, means let's make sure that only eligible voters are voting and nobody else. And I think in Minnesota, we've done a really good job of that. I'm not going to give you a long laundry list, but let me give you a couple examples. I think the jewel in the crown, from my standpoint, is same-day voter registration. Minnesota's had that for 53 years, since 1973, and it means what it sounds like. I'm sure many people in this room have used it. It means, in Minnesota, you can register up to and including game day. Election day itself, right in the polling place, right? And voter registration, is a simple concept. In Minnesota, at least, it means 2 simple things. You gotta show you are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. That's it. It's no more complicated than that. It doesn't mean 20 things or 8 things. 2. You are who you say you are, you live where you say you live. And in Minnesota, we have a long and flexible list of things you can use to show either or both of those. Most people use a driver's license, but not everyone has one. Or maybe you have one that it's a good driver's license, but it still has your old address from a year ago, or 3 months ago, or whatever. So we have a long and flexible list, but we've said for 53 years in Minnesota, as long as you can show that stuff, you are who you say you are, you live where you say you live, who cares if you're doing it on game day? That's fine, and it's worked out really well for us. In Minnesota, remember, we have the law now that says anyone who's eligible to vote can vote from home. You don't have to go to a polling place. I still like to. I have 2 kids at home. I like to bring them to the polling place, thank the election judges, soak up the atmosphere of election day. For someone like me, election day is like the Super Bowl and the World Series combined, right? Come on, this is the whole thing that you plan for. So I like to do that, but a lot of people increasingly are saying, no, I like to vote from my kitchen table or my couch. Take the time, whatever. And that's up to everyone. There's no right way or wrong way to vote. We got multiple ways to vote in Minnesota, but we've got that law. Those are pro-access laws, but what about the security piece? We hear a lot these days from some about, the election system, you can't trust it, it's insecure. Let me give you an example about a top-in-the-country law that we have in Minnesota that has literally been copied by other states. Literally. I have a colleague, Republican colleague from another state. He said, we love that law. We literally cut and pasted it and passed it in our state. Here's the law. It has to do with voting from home. Once in a while, I'll get this question from someone who's suspicious about security. It's a fair question. Someone will say, Steve, how can this vote from home, vote by mail thing possibly be secure? You're telling me there are hundreds of thousands of blank ballots just floating out there in Minnesota? What are they, stacks in the post office, and they're on mail trucks, and maybe they're stuffed into residential mailboxes without a lock and key? What is to prevent a mailbox thief from just going around the neighborhoods on the day or days that he thinks they're going to be delivered and just plucking out 1 or 10 or 100 of these things and voting them on his own. How can this be secure? I think it's a fair question. The answer is we've got a really good law that other states have copied. And here's the law. Some of you may have done this, or remember this if you've ever voted from home by mail. Namely, when you order that ballot, you're not just ordering the ballot. When you order the ballot, you got to provide now 2 forms of personal identifying information, both a driver's license or state ID number and a partial social security number. Then when you get the ballot, after you voted, you've got to sign swearing an oath that you were the one who voted it and not someone else. And then you have to have a witness sign that ballot as well. Okay, back to the mailbox thief. He thinks he's being all clever. He's going into the neighborhood. He swipes 10 or 100 of these things. He's going to vote the ballot that he wants and the candidates that he wants. He's never going to get away with it. The only way he would be successful in this crime is if he knew the intended voters, both forms of the intended voters' personal identifying information, and he forges their signature, and he forges their witness's signature. Unless all of that stuff is true, he's not getting away with anything. And those ballots he sends in, they'll be destroyed. And then the true voter who ordered it will figure out that they didn't get their ballot, they'll order another one, and they'll get one. So my point is, we've got good laws in Minnesota, and that matters a lot. And these are laws that, over the years and decades, have been bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans. They've served many, many Minnesotans, and that's a good thing. We should be really, really proud of them in Minnesota. But of course, laws only take you part way. You can have all the great laws in the world, but they're just pretty words on a piece of paper unless people want to vote, and they're inspired to vote, and they're motivated to vote. That's that culture piece. Now, you hear a lot these days about the culture wars in our politics, right? I don't mean that when I talk about culture. When I talk about culture, I'm talking about a habit or a way of doing things. What is our habit? What is our way of doing things in Minnesota historically when it comes to voting? And I say we've done a really good job over the last few decades of that. We've got groups like Indivisible, right? Which I know are going to make people, make sure that people vote this coming fall in 175 days. We've got our schools, which I think still do a really, really good job of conveying the message that voting matters. It's significant, it's consequential. We elect more people to more things in this country than anywhere else in the world. They don't have elected school boards in most of Europe. They don't vote on the Soil and Water Board over in Japan. We elect people to a lot of offices in this country, and what they do or don't do has real downstream effects on the rest of us. I think our schools do a good job of teaching that. And in our office, we do a mock election program for students who are not yet old enough to vote, from elementary through high school. In 2024, we had 131,000 students cast ballots in that, teaching them the ropes early, literally, that all it means is filling in a bubble or a box, right? Someone might not know that. So that cultural piece is important. I think our media culture in Minnesota around elections is healthy in the sense that they cover elections. You may not like this or that media outlet or their spin on the ball in a particular case, but no one can say in Minnesota that elections are just ignored and not covered. They are covered, top to bottom, left to right, and that's a good thing as well. So that cultural piece is important too, and as are grassroots groups like Indivisible, who get out there and make sure people understand their rights, people understand where to vote, how to vote, and all the rest. And we're trying to do our part in our office as well. Our website, if I can brag, is really good. If you go to mnvotes.gov, mnvotes.gov, you can register to vote on that website. You can order the ballot to come to your home on that website. And one of my favorites is we have a personalized sample ballot feature on there. You go to the website, you type in your address right on the homepage, and up comes a bunch of stuff, what precinct you're in, what your polling place is, all that, but also a sample ballot. Because a lot of folks, you know this, are thinking around election time, like in a year like this, they're thinking, okay, I know there's a governor's race, and I know there's a U.S. Senate race, but are we even voting in our area for county commissioner, or was that last time? Or wait a minute, is the mayor up this year, or am I getting that wrong? Or what all are we voting on? I know the big stuff, but I just don't know. I mean, is the state senate up this year or not? I don't even know. You can find out. You type in your address. Don't do it now, because we don't know. This is before the filing period, but later towards the fall, when you do that, you just type in your address and up pops a sample ballot, every contest and every candidate in every contest, along with their websites, if they've provided a website, right? So that's something we're doing to add to the cultural piece. So
look, we've got the good laws in Minnesota, we've got a good pro-voter culture. Time and time and time again, we are number one in the country. Once in a while, we falter to number 2 or number 3. We're not gonna let Wisconsin beat us this time, right? I mean, in my book, if we're like 46 and they're 47, I'm declaring victory. We beat Wisconsin, that's the important thing. But I mean, I think we're poised for a really good year. So all that is to say that, remember how I said I wanted 2 things in this election? High turnout and low drama. I'm pretty confident about the high turnout part. This is Minnesota. This is what we do. We vote in droves. We vote at sky-high levels. Sure, we got some work to do. It's not every single community that votes at the same sky-high level, but man, you look at this across zip codes, across political lines, across county lines, we do a really, really good job in Minnesota of voting. So I'm not so worried about the high turnout part. We're gonna have high turnout. What about the low drama part? There, I do have some worries. I do. And I gotta tell you, I'll just be honest about the nature of the worry. You know, in our office, as I said, we work a lot with our local partners constantly, counties, cities, and townships. They're on the front lines, they're counting the votes, they're paying, training, hiring the election judges, and we work with them a lot of things. And at a time like this, in every election year, say 175 days from the election, we're always planning, we're always looking at what we call an all-hazards approach to planning for any election with our partners, which means we gotta plan for stuff that might never happen. In fact, it might be a remote possibility. But just like everyone in every job I know, in every occupation I'm aware of, our mindset is hope for the best, but plan for the worst, right? I think we all do that, or have done that. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. So we routinely plan for things that might never happen, probably never will happen. We have to plan for the power outage. We have to plan for the bomb threat. We have to plan for the weather event, either a late season tornado or an early season blizzard, right? Take your pick. But we have to do that stuff, even if there's a 1% chance. And I'm here to tell you 175 days out, unfortunately, that we now have to add to that pile, to that bundle, another hazard. And that is the hazard that our own federal government might, in some way, directly or indirectly, interfere with this coming election. I want to make real clear here, I'm not predicting that that will happen. It's not a prediction, but it's a precaution. And it's one that you would expect me or anyone in my position to take. It's like the power outage. It's like the bomb threat. I'm not saying there's a 90% chance. It may be a very, very low chance. I hope it is. But there's a non-zero chance. And we've seen that over the last year and a half. And I want to catalog a little bit of that for you, because I have a sense and a hunch that a lot of people in this room are feeling what I'm feeling, but I don't automatically assume that. So let me tell you where I'm coming from on that. A few weeks into the new administration in 2025, the President of the United States issued an executive order on elections. And he sought to impose by executive order a mandatory documentary proof of citizenship requirement on all Americans, just through an executive order signed in the Oval Office. So Minnesota joined 18 other states right away. We went to court, and we won. We got that thing taken off, that executive order. And the way we got it taken off, and the way that the court saw it immediately was, look, the Constitution is really clear here. The states are in charge of the time, place, and manner of elections. That's the exact language in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 4. Time, place, and manner, states in charge, except Congress can step in. If you pass a law, like the Voting Rights Act of 1965, what's left of it, that is, you can pass a law, and Congress can step into some of those spaces. But the Constitution says nothing, not one word, about a president of the United States, this one or anyone, just kind of waving a magic wand in the Oval Office through an executive order and pretending to impose election laws on people, right? So the court saw right through that and got rid of that. But that said something to me about what the intentions were, right? He's done it again a few weeks ago, about 4 weeks ago, he did the same thing. This time it was an executive order saying that the post office from now on would be forbidden from even delivering a mail ballot unless they compared it against some list that he and a couple of federal agencies were going to put together, and if no one was on that list, they were forbidden to even deliver that. Well, Minnesota is now in line with this time over 20 states, and we've sued, and I have a good feeling about that one too. On the same basis, even if someone in this room or somewhere and someone anywhere thought that was a good idea, the way you do that good idea is you pass a law through Congress. Presidents don't have the power in the elections area to just wave a magic wand in the Oval Office and start decreeing stuff, right? So I'm optimistic about that, but again, it says a little bit about where the mindset is on this stuff. This is something that the President and the administration, they want to do. And that's something that should, I think, give us a lot of pause. So there's that. But I have to tell you, in this job lately, and that's one example, there are others I want to talk about. Sometimes it feels like it's just one outrage after another. I'll give you another example. I don't need to tell you about the ice surge that the state went through this last winter. It's a pretty anxious and traumatic time for a lot of people. We all watched it unfold, because these days, everyone's a journalist. All you need is a cell phone, right? And there was footage. Imagine if some of what we saw had gone on 20, 30 years ago. We'd never know, unless there was a TV camera person who happened to be there. Now, in the age of smartphones, everyone's a journalist. Everyone bears witness. Everyone records. Everyone is the eyes and ears of people who weren't there. We saw a lot of stuff, didn't we, this last winter, from people who were on the street recording this. And you may remember that day when Alex Preddy was gunned down on the streets of Minneapolis, the second U.S. citizen to be killed in as many weeks. Within hours of him being gunned down, literally that day, it was a Saturday, within hours of him being gunned down, we in Minnesota got a letter from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General in Washington, D.C. And in that letter, she laid out three things, three demands that she said, or certainly implied, would be tied to a drawdown of ICE and federal forces. One of the demands in her letter was that I needed to hand over to her and the Justice Department millions of private, personal, sensitive data records on our registered voters. So we took a look at that. This had been a long-standing request of theirs anyway. We looked at the law. We started and ended with the law, not our personal preferences, not what we like or dislike. What does the law say? Are they entitled to this information or not? And I called it a ransom note. And I told her the answer is no. You don't get that. So, a few days after that, connecting those two things, just imagine connecting the bloodshed on the streets of Minneapolis with that request for private voter data, okay? So we said no. A few days after that, you may remember this, the FBI raided the Atlanta, Georgia, Fulton County Elections Office. An FBI raid. They went in there, Tulsi Gabbard was there, like hiding behind a telephone pole, and they go in there and they take about 700 boxes full of stuff related to the 2020 election. This is all rearview mirror stuff. It wasn't even about 2026. This is 3 elections ago now. And they're still fighting that battle. You realize that in the state of Georgia, they counted those votes 3 ways. Election day and then 2 separate recounts. 2, not 1, but 2. This thing has been litigated and analyzed and scrutinized top to bottom. And yet years later, they go in and they take out 700 some boxes from that office. Our own FBI. Really indescribable in a mature modern democracy that something like that would happen, right? That wasn't the final outrage. A few days after that, the President of the United States gave an interview in which he said he thought he wanted to, quote, nationalize and, quote, take over elections in about 15 places in this country. Now, he didn't mention which 15. But I gotta think we're a good candidate to be on that list, right? He told reporters earlier this year that he is convinced that he won Minnesota 3 times. It's there, you can see it. This wasn't a hot mic moment either. This was at a press conference. 3 times he says he won Minnesota. We know the truth, the math. He lost Minnesota 3 times, right? But that hasn't stopped him from saying it, and other people believing it. So when I look out at the landscape and what's facing us from Washington DC, I do worry. You've got executive orders, you've got the president saying and doing things which we've never seen before in this country when it comes to democracy. And I haven't even mentioned yet what Congress is up to. You may have heard of this SAVE Act that is currently bottled up in the US Senate, right? I think we gotta talk about that a little bit. The SAVE Act is beyond just a voter ID bill. As many of you know, the SAVE Act would impose upon all of us voters for the first time in American history a documentary proof of citizenship requirement. Documentary, meaning papers. You gotta show your papers. But let me just step back and say something for a second that to me is important to say. I totally understand how anyone in this room or anywhere in Minnesota or America would hear that, and only that, and think that was a reasonable idea. I understand that. I understand why on the surface this has a lot of appeal. I totally get it. After all, I can imagine someone thinking, look, you don't need 100 things or a dozen things in terms of voting qualifications. You need to be a citizen, you need to be a resident of the state where you say you are, and you gotta be 18 or older. Those are the three. And is it really such a unreasonable or inconvenient thing to ask someone to show that with papers? I understand that, and I think it's important to understand why people would, on the surface, find that appealing. But this is one of those examples where the more you look, the less you like. And let me give you one example. We got 69 million people in America, 69 million women who have a different last name now than the one they were born with. Not a problem if you got a passport. That's the ultimate document that shows your proof of citizenship. No problem. You got a passport, you got a VIP pass. That is the ultimate document. I got a passport, you're automatically, we know you're a US citizen. You're good to go. But tens of millions of those in that category do not have a passport, do not have an enhanced version of a state ID that demonstrates citizenship. Tens of millions. So what would they have to do in that situation if they had to show papers? Well, they have to produce both a birth certificate and a marriage record. And that's one per marriage. If there's more than one marriage, then it's more than one marriage certificate, right? Because you have to follow the changing name if the name's changed each time. And I still understand why some people might hear that and say, okay, yeah, it's not ideal, but I think most people can get it together and find that stuff, right? I understand even that. But I'm here to tell you that it's not so simple. And that's not just me guessing or speculating. Look at the state of Kansas. 10 to 15 years ago, they attempted and experimented with this very thing on the state level. You might call it a mini SAVE Act. Just in the state of Kansas, they passed a law saying you gotta have documentary proof of citizenship, meaning you gotta show your papers and prove that you're a US citizen. And before a federal judge struck down that law, they held an election under that law in the state of Kansas. And when they did that, when Kansas held that election under a documentary proof of citizenship requirement, 31,000 eligible Kansans, eligible, I gotta stress that, like me, like you, born, raised, voting for years or decades, 31,000 people in Kansas who were eligible to vote were shut out, turned away, unable to vote. Now you can do the math, we're about twice the size of Kansas. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And what we gotta ask ourselves, at least what I ask myself is, look, is it worth shutting out potentially tens of thousands of people in Minnesota to catch no more than a few handfuls, in all likelihood? The incidence of this problem in the state of Minnesota, that is non-citizens voting, is really, really small. It's microscopic, okay? So that's the balancing that I do in my head, which is, okay, is it worth the risk? Should we potentially shut out 50, 60,000 people to catch a few handfuls or some very, very low number? I say no. I say no. And I think a lot of other people, enough people have concluded that too, because right now it's pretty well bottled up in the US Senate. Seems unlikely to get out of there. But again, that is sort of an announcement of intentions out there, along with the executive orders, along with the statements, along with the FBI raids, along with the ransom notes to states like Minnesota. And that has me concerned about this upcoming election. And I hope you can appreciate, I'm trying to thread a certain needle here. I want to be realistic. I want to sound the alarm about this without being alarmist. if that's even possible. Sound the alarm without being alarmist. So I'll say again, I'm not predicting that there will be any sort of particular kind of interference. I really am not. I hope it's just a bunch of bluster. And then between the courts and the congressional process, this stuff is stalled out and we'll have smooth sailing here in Minnesota. I hope that's the case. So I'm not predicting that it's gonna happen. But you'd expect me in my job to be at least thinking about this and planning for this, and we are, actively. I don't just mean we're stroking our chins and sending emails to each other. I mean we're actually going places and meeting with partners at the national level, partners definitely across state lines, secretaries of state. We're collaborating with one another, and then extensively here within Minnesota as well. And we're actively gaming out these scenarios. Let me tell you the one scenario that's the one I hear about the most, particularly in the Twin Cities. People come up to me all the time when I'm out and about, and they say, hey, what about ICE at the polling place? Or if not ICE, Border Patrol, or if not Border Patrol, National Guard. What about some sort of federal law enforcement presence at the polling place? Does that worry you? Does that concern you? Because I'm concerned, or my community is concerned about that. And here's where I can veer into optimism, okay? Like I said, I'm a long-term optimist about democracy in America and Minnesota, and here's an example. So for those of you, or those anywhere, who's concerned about that particular thing, I understand that, particularly given what Minnesota went through this last winter, and let's face it, we have 3,000 polling places in Minnesota, okay? Just about 3,000. But you wouldn't have to go to all 3,000 to sow chaos. You could choose about 20, if they're the right 20. And you can get people really, really scared. And word travels. And so that's the worry here. So I understand it, I understand the worry. But here's where I'm optimistic. First of all, I always remind people, remember, you don't have to go to a polling place. In Minnesota, we have the option to vote from home if you want to. You don't have to run the gauntlet of anyone you don't want to, whether that's law enforcement or any member of that option. There are 3 ways to vote in Minnesota. In the polling place on election day, in person before election day during the absentee voting period, or from home by mail. Those are the 3. So people have options. The second reason I'm optimistic about that particular scenario is back to the laws, the good, clear laws we have in Minnesota. We've got great laws on this subject. I'll give you an example, and you election judges might remember this from the time you did that work. In Minnesota, we have a law that says the only folks who are allowed within 100 feet of a polling place are voters, of course, election workers, anyone who naturally works in that building, the school, the church, the city hall, etc. And each political party, major political party, is entitled to send one person, one. Not a mob of 50 or a swarm of 20 or whatever. One, that's it. One person, designated in writing, by the way. You can't show up and say, I'm here for the Democrats, gotta let me in, or I'm here for the Republicans. Can't do it. It's gotta be designated in writing by a party unit. That one person can be in there, but even then, we've got really strict and detailed laws. Even that one person cannot stand within 6 feet of a voter, cannot speak to a voter, can only issue challenges to a voter based on personal knowledge. That's the exact phrase in the statute, personal knowledge. Meaning, it can't be a whim or a hunch or a bad vibe. It can't be, she just looks off to me. Or, I heard that guy speaking Spanish in the hallway. There's no way he could be a citizen, right? It's not good enough. So what about law enforcement? Another good Minnesota law that we've had for decades, by the way. Decades. And this law about law enforcement says that it's unlawful in Minnesota to preemptively post law enforcement at a polling place. Preemptively. Even if it's the best of intentions. Even if a really kind-hearted sheriff or police chief says, you know what, just to calm everyone down, you know how spicy things can get over precinct 3. Why don't we just put a deputy at the door or a police officer at the door, you know, just to calm everyone down. Even if it comes from a good place, you can't do that under Minnesota law. Now, of course, common sense tells you, and the law itself says, of course they can be called in to respond to something. If a fist fight breaks out in the polling place, or you know, something else happens in the polling place, of course they can come on a moment's notice, but you can't beforehand have someone stationed there. And that goes for local, state, and federal law enforcement. We're quite confident about that. And so we're going to spend the next 175 days talking about that law in particular. I tell you all these details Because, and that's one of many scenarios, but on that particular scenario, I feel pretty good, right? It's not a guarantee of anything, but we've got good laws, good customs, good traditions in Minnesota that should be enough to ward off that particular one. Plus, let's face it, in terms of the odds here, I'm not so sure the federal government wants to touch the hot stove twice, right? It didn't go so well the first time, this last winter, and I see no evidence that they're gearing up for another mini surge of any kind. That said, like I said, it's a non-zero chance, and just like the power outage or the bomb threat, we got to plan for it. We got to game it out. We got to talk about what would happen if those things happen. All that is to say that I am generally more optimistic than pessimistic. Now, one question that might be on your minds, I'm guessing, is what can people do? Anyone in this room or anywhere else? You're very action-oriented here in Indivisible and in this chapter in particular. Man, I saw that list on green paper of all the stuff you did just in 2025. You're doing a lot. So, what can a citizen do? At this point, I'm not ready to say that what needs to be done is a massive physical mobilization to go to the polling places. In fact, I think that could have a boomerang effect, right? You don't want to freak people out at the polling place, right? And despite the best of intentions, it might come off that way. So at this point, without any more evidence or facts, that's not on my list of things. But one of the things that is really positive that citizens can do and band together to do is get in the information space. Push back against the mis and disinformation about our election system. Say what's true, not just what's untrue, but what's true, what the rules are. I gave you one example. Remember, you can vote from home. You don't have to go to a polling place. Tell people what the rules are. Tell people what their options are. That's one thing. The other thing is to be an election judge. Many of you in this room have already been an election judge. That's one way for you to be in the polling place to treat everyone fairly, everyone, regardless of who they're voting for, regardless of where they live, regardless of their background, whether they're red or blue or anything else. That's one way to make sure your presence in the polling place is calming and soothing and by the book and fair to everyone. That's another way. Those are two things that everyday people can do. But in that information space, it is pushing back against disinformation and misinformation, which I think is really important, and we're seeing more of it. And in our office, we're seeing it ramp up predictably before the election. People saying things about the election system that just aren't true. And by the way, when I talk about disinformation, I'm not talking about disagreement. Disagreement is as American as apple pie. That's why we have a democracy. People are going to feel different ways about things. That's fine. I would never say that someone who disagrees with me is just, oh, you're just spouting disinformation. But there are certain things that are disinformation, that are just objectively not true, and that are distortions of what the system is. I'll give you an example. Remember at the beginning, I say that in our office, we don't count votes. We don't. We never have. But it would take you about 60 seconds right now on your device to do a Google search, and you would find people all over the place in political spaces saying that I, and not just I, but my colleagues in other states, not only are we counting the votes, we're rigging, fixing, and stealing the votes. We're adding votes to the vote totals of the candidates we like, and we're subtracting vote totals from the ones that we don't like. I'm here to tell you, it's disinformation because it's not just a matter of disagreement. I don't even know how I would do that. If I were of the mind to do it, I don't know how logistically I could ever do that. We have a total bottom-up system, not top-down. It's counties, it's cities, and townships. They're the ones counting the votes. I'm not even in the same room, or the same county, or within hundreds of miles, depending on where you are in Minnesota of the vote counting. We never lay a glove on anyone's ballot during election time. So that's what I mean by disinformation. Getting out there and making sure that when you hear it, you push back against it. That's going to be really important. And our office on the official side can give you a lot of good resources on that too. And if you go to that website, mnvotes.gov, there's a lot of good information there. So look, we got 175 days left. It's not a lot of time. I'm a long-term optimist about this stuff, but that doesn't mean we let our guard down. There's plenty out there to be suspicious about and to be worried about. But in the end, I think we do have good laws. We do have good rules. We do have great partnerships. And we certainly in Minnesota, as we've shown recently, we have the resolve. We have the determination to push back against those who would mess with our democracy. And so to all of you, I just want to thank you for being here. You're here for a lot of reasons, I'm sure, one of which is that you want to strengthen and preserve our democracy. I thank you for that. and I thank you for being excellent partners in the democracy business. Thanks very much.